Hey there, it's Angela. Did you hear about what I'm doing in October? I'm calling it a month of focusing on fewer things better. If you know that you need to streamline and take some things off your plate this school year, but you don't know where to start, here's some support. I'm starting a pop-up group on Facebook for us to have some conversations based on my newest book, Fewer Things Better, The Courage to Focus on What Matters Most. It's sort of like a book club, except easier. Read or listen to the book at your own pace and check into the group anytime, as often or as little as you would like, throughout the month of October. There's no pressure to read chapter by chapter. And in fact, the discussions will be valuable to you even if you don't read the book at all. I want this to be an easy, no-commitment way for you to have community and support in living the Fewer Things Better way this school year. Go to fewerthingsbetter.com to join. Welcome to episode 176 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking about the psychology principle of radical acceptance and what it means to accept the things that you cannot change in teaching. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript, or find our new Truth for Teachers podcast community on Facebook. You can share your thoughts on the show there and reflect with other listeners in our private group. This episode is sponsored by UL Explore Labs. It's a free STEM-focused experience to build scientific knowledge and passion among middle school students. UL Explore Labs makes it simple to implement hands-on investigations in the classroom, and it's aligned with NGSS. Get your students solving real-world problems by going to ulexplorelabs.org. It's ulexplorelabs.org. Today on the podcast, we are talking about radical acceptance. Now, this is a concept that I mentioned briefly in my book, Fewer Things Better. I've also mentioned it briefly in my book, Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching. But I wanted to do a deep dive on how radical acceptance actually works, because it is a tricky principle for a lot of people, but it can be super transformative once you get it. Radical acceptance is a useful approach in our inner dialogue or our self-talk when there are certain things about our work or any aspect of our lives for that matter that we just can't change. Practicing radical acceptance doesn't mean that you approve of the problems that you're facing or that you deem other people's inappropriate behavior as okay. You don't have to ignore your own needs to practice radical acceptance. You don't have to let people walk all over you or ignore your problems or tell yourself that it's okay that something awful is happening. Radical acceptance means that you stop wasting energy resisting reality. You stop complaining and stop bemoaning how terrible things are. You need all your strength to teach. And practicing radical acceptance will keep you from draining your energy with perpetual outrage. Radical acceptance allows you to deal realistically with the facts of the situation rather than the story you're telling yourself about the facts. It allows you to sit with the discomfort of the present moment instead of insisting that it shouldn't be happening. I'm going to talk about how to apply this principle to a couple of different things. We'll talk about radical self-acceptance, radical acceptance of other people, and radical acceptance of our circumstances. I want to begin with radical self-acceptance because I think that when you can practice this principle toward yourself, it makes it so much easier to extend that acceptance towards others. Radical self-acceptance is being brave enough to see ourselves and accept ourselves exactly as we are. Now, you might not like certain things about yourself, but you can accept that those things are part of the reality of being you. That's different from denying it or being defensive about it or hating those qualities about yourself. Even as you let go of behaviors that aren't serving you well, you can accept each stage of that journey as you grow into more of the person that you really are. The goal is to see your true self, see all of you, the person who you really are, without judgment and without labels, so that you can work with what you've got. Many of us are trying to work with an ideal version of ourselves that doesn't actually exist. And so we never feel like we measure up. Or we're working with the worst possible interpretation of ourselves, and we always feel bad about who we are. Radical self-acceptance is seeing all of you and accepting all of you. You don't have to love everything about yourself or love everything that you say and do. You're simply accepting reality rather than fighting reality. You're not expending any energy wishing that things were different or complaining about it. When you practice accepting yourself exactly as you are, you're able to let go of those thoughts that make it harder for you to be your best. You're no longer working against your own thoughts. Self-acceptance also gives you a model to follow when you need to accept others. Radical acceptance of other people requires accepting who other people are. It's knowing that you cannot change them, and it's not your responsibility to do so. We can influence other people, but we can't control them. We can believe the best about them and believe in their capacity to do better, but we cannot change them. We can only change our thoughts about other people and how we choose to respond to other people. So even when we're in situations when we can't leave misbehavior unaddressed, we still need to approach things with the understanding that we can't control how other people think or feel or behave or act. This is part of radical acceptance, seeing others fully for who they are without taking on the responsibility for fixing them or changing them. This is a difficult principle to apply with students, I think, particularly when you see the potential for greatness in them and you sincerely want to help them be their best. But I promise you will actually have more of a positive impact on them when you practice radical acceptance about who they are, because then you're able to see them for their true selves instead of giving into these beliefs you hold that they should be different somehow. I want to emphasize that what I'm teaching you here today is not a tool that you should expect others in your district to have. You will need to practice radical acceptance about the fact that your supervisors probably don't practice radical acceptance. In a sense, as a teacher, you're being evaluated on how much you are able to change your students. How much do they learn? How do they behave when they're around you? Learning to practice radical acceptance of your students will keep you from internalizing this pressure and shift the way that you see your role in the classroom. It's a tool to keep you from internalizing a toxic system for dealing with problems in which you're mentally carrying the responsibility for all kinds of things that are out of your control. Just because someone else places that weight on you doesn't mean you have to carry it. Just because they say it's your responsibility doesn't mean that you have to believe that it is. You have influence over your students, but not control. Your choices in the classroom can escalate or de-escalate problems. That's the influence. You can make things better for kids or worse for kids. So we want to use radical acceptance as a tool to move us back into a place of empowerment where we have a healthy and realistic assessment of this situation so that we can choose how to best respond. When you accept a student exactly as they are and the situation exactly as it is, you can then say, here's the reality of what I'm dealing with. What thoughts and words and actions can I choose to make the situation better? When this particular incident happens again, what response can I choose that will be less frustrating for me and more helpful for the student? I don't like that it's happening. I don't believe the student's behavior is okay, but I accept that it is happening. I accept that this is my reality right now, and I'm choosing to respond to it constructively instead of insisting that it shouldn't be happening this way. You can practice radical acceptance toward your students' families as well. Rather than criticize their parenting skills or the social norms of the community that you teach in, practice radical acceptance. It is what it is. Any energy that you expend insisting that things should be different is wasted. You want to shift from a place of resisting reality to accepting it. And then all that frustration and anxiety can be directed towards something useful, which is improving the situation. In practical terms, this is the difference between saying, I can't believe parents these days, they just don't care, they should be supporting me instead of ignoring me or criticizing me all the time. And instead saying, I accept the reality that my students and their families are living in. I refuse to waste my time mentally replaying how I think things should be. I'm not going to let my energy be drained away by complaining about their lifestyle or their choices or the way that they talk to me. Instead, I'm going to recognize that my thoughts about the situation are creating more suffering for me. My thoughts and my interpretation are making a tough situation even harder. I'm going to focus on what I can do to help kids get the best possible outcome. I'm directing all my frustration towards solutions. I'm looking for ways that I can meet their needs in these circumstances, rather than blaming them or focusing on how impossible the circumstance is. I'm going to offer support without judgment. What thoughts, words, and actions can I choose that will make things better? You can't change the students who have been assigned to your classroom, and you can't change their family dynamics. And as long as you're repeating to yourself, this kid should not be in my classroom, it's so unfair, I have no support, I can't believe I have to deal with this. When you're repeating those thoughts, you are allowing your energy to be drained away. You are forfeiting your personal power in that moment, and you're fixating on your beliefs about how things, quote, should be. That's an okay place to go from time to time. We all need to wallow a little bit. We all need to vent. But you can't stay stuck there. And I know from personal experience that many of us as educators do get stuck there. We complain about the same things every day for the entirety of the school year, and we worry about and dread those things all summer long. And then on the first day back in the next school year, we begin to anticipate those same problems. We wait for them to happen. We're ready to start complaining again. Complaining is an unproductive form of resistance. It's not the same thing as examining a problem from multiple perspectives to understand it better. There's nothing wrong with talking about inequitable school funding or lack of resources and systemic problems. And in fact, I believe that these critical conversations are an important part of radical acceptance. It's very difficult to accept something that you don't understand. It's really hard to tell yourself, this thing that I perceive is making my life terrible. I don't know why it's happening. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I just choose to accept it. That's hard to do, and that's why many of us get stuck in that trap of talking about our problems over and over again. We're trying to make sense of them. Our brains are pattern seeking. We naturally want to make connections between different incidents and look for meaning. So I think it's important to work with this natural tendency. When you can begin to make sense of the things that are bothering you, and you do that by exploring those root problems, it becomes much easier to practice radical acceptance. You'll find yourself moving from a place of judgment to curiosity. It's the difference between saying, I don't understand why things have to be like that, and saying instead, what am I not understanding about this situation? And how can I learn more? This is particularly useful in our work in schools, given how many of our frustrations center around bureaucracy, the testing, the paperwork, the overemphasis on data, lack of resources, and so on. The better you understand how these systems were created and the way that they operate, the more empowered you will feel to make change. You're no longer helplessly repeating to yourself, this is so unfair, this is just not right. Because you begin to understand the motives of the decision makers and the constraints of the system and the inequalities and biases and the structure within our schools and our government. That kind of knowledge of understanding systems and structures, that's power. That understanding will prevent you from being complicit with the status quo. It will allow you to instead consciously disrupt it. In other words, radical acceptance is a principle that you can practice to lay the groundwork for productive resistance. Being angry about all these things that just aren't right for teachers or kids in our schools, that anger doesn't create change unless you channel it into something productive. It can be helpful to examine the thoughts that are creating more suffering and practice radical acceptance of the circumstance. We can take constructive steps to improve working, teaching, and learning conditions, but do so while still practicing radical acceptance of our current reality. We can change the self-talk from, I can't believe this is happening, to, it is happening, and I accept that reality for the purpose of being able to address it in the healthiest, most productive way possible. My challenge to you this week is to notice when you are resisting your current reality and creating additional stress and frustration and suffering for yourself because of that resistance. Just notice when these negative feelings start to arise, when you start to feel stressed out and agitated, and think about the thoughts that precipitated them. Usually when I'm feeling miserable, I've been thinking thoughts like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this is happening. I shouldn't have to be dealing with this. When you notice those kinds of thoughts, it's an opportunity to practice. And I do mean practice because it takes repetition before this gets easier and more natural. But practice radical acceptance. Practice shifting to thoughts like, I can believe it's happening because it is. This is my reality right now. Not forever, but right now, I can accept that this is the situation that I'm dealing with. I want to see all the circumstances as clearly as possible. My thoughts that these things shouldn't be happening the way they are, those thoughts aren't helpful to me. The situation might not be okay with me, and I don't have to approve or condone the situation while practicing radical acceptance. I'm just accepting reality rather than resisting it. What am I not understanding about this situation? And how can I learn more? What thoughts and words and actions can I choose that will make things better? Your takeaway truth for the week ahead is a quote from Eckhart Tolle, who said, accept, then act. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. Always work with, not against it. This will miraculously transform your whole life. I'd love to hear your experiences with practicing radical acceptance. If you have questions or you're struggling to accept a particular aspect of yourself or your circumstances, head over to our Truth for Teachers podcast community on Facebook and let us know so we can help. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.